The president is commander-in-chief of the United States military. He has the nuclear codes. He can order troops into combat. He's the most powerful military leader on earth. But there's one thing he can't easily do: fire generals he doesn't like. Most Americans think the president has absolute control over the military, that he can fire any general anytime, for any reason, like firing a cabinet secretary or a political appointee. That's not how it works. And the reason why reveals something most people don't understand about how military and political power actually function in America. Here's why the president can't just fire generals, and why that matters. Let's start with what most people think. The president is commander-in-chief. Article 2 of the Constitution gives him that authority. So logically, he should be able to fire anyone in the military, right? Wrong. Because generals aren't political appointees. They're military officers. And military officers operate under a completely different system than civilian government employees. Here's the key difference. When you're appointed to a cabinet position, you serve at the pleasure of the president. He can fire you tomorrow. No reason needed. That's political appointment. But generals? They're commissioned officers. They've been in the military for decades. They were promoted through a specific system. And that system includes Senate confirmation. Every time an officer is promoted to general, the Senate Armed Services Committee must confirm that promotion. It's not just a rubber stamp. The Senate investigates. They hold hearings. They approve or reject. Once confirmed, that general holds their rank. The president can't just take it away. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but the president can still fire them from their position, right? He can remove them as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or as a combatant commander, or as a service chief. Technically, yes. But practically, it's much harder than you think, because firing a general requires justification. The president has to explain why, to Congress, to the media, to the American public. And if he can't provide a good reason, there are consequences, political consequences, congressional investigations, public backlash, damage to civil-military relations. This isn't theoretical. It's happened. Let's look at the most famous example. 1951, Korean War. General Douglas MacArthur commanded United Nations forces in Korea. He was one of the most famous generals in American history. World War II hero, larger-than-life personality. He also publicly disagreed with President Truman's strategy. MacArthur wanted to expand the war into China. Truman wanted to contain it to Korea. MacArthur went to newspapers. He criticized the president's decisions. He tried to force Truman's hand by making public statements that contradicted official policy. That's insubordination, open defiance of civilian authority. So Truman fired him. And it nearly destroyed Truman's presidency. MacArthur came home to a hero's welcome. Ticker tape parades, congressional testimony, massive public support. Truman's approval rating plummeted, even though Truman was constitutionally correct. Even though MacArthur had clearly violated the chain of command, the political cost was enormous. That's the lesson every president learns. Firing a general, even for cause, even when justified, is politically dangerous. Now let's talk about the structure that makes this even more complicated. Most people think the military chain of command goes like this: President, Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, then down to the troops. Not quite. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs doesn't command anything. Let me repeat that. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in America, has zero operational command authority. He's an advisor, that's it. He advises the President and Secretary of Defense on military matters. But he doesn't command troops. He can't order military operations. So who does? The combatant commanders, geographic and functional commanders who control specific regions or missions. Central Command for the Middle East, Indo-Pacific Command for Asia, Strategic Command for nuclear forces. These are the generals who actually command military operations. They report to the Secretary of Defense and the President, not through the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, directly. And then there are the service chiefs, the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Chief of Naval Operations, the Air Force Chief of Staff, the Marine Corps Commandant. They don't command operations either. They organize, train, and equip their services. They manage the institutional military. But they don't fight wars. This structure is deliberate. It's designed to prevent any single military officer from accumulating too much power. And it means the president can't just fire one general and change everything. Because military authority is distributed across multiple positions, each with Senate confirmation, each with congressional oversight. Now let's add another layer. Congress, the Senate Armed Services Committee, doesn't just confirm generals. It oversees them. It holds hearings. It requests testimony. It investigates problems. And if the president fires a general without clear justification, that committee will ask questions. Public questions. Uncomfortable questions. Why was this general fired? Was it for legitimate military reasons or political reasons? Did the general refuse an illegal order? Did the general disagree with policy? These questions matter because the military isn't supposed to be politicized. Officers are supposed to give their best military advice even if it contradicts what the president wants to hear. If generals think they'll be fired for disagreeing, they stop giving honest advice. They become yes men, and that's dangerous. History is full of examples where leaders surrounded themselves with yes men and made catastrophic decisions as a result. The American system is designed to prevent that by making it hard to fire generals who give inconvenient advice. But what about when a general actually needs to be fired? What does that look like? 2010, General Stanley McChrystal commanded U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. A Rolling Stone article quoted McChrystal and his staff mocking civilian leaders. Vice President Biden, the National Security Advisor, others. That's insubordination, violation of military culture and chain of command, clear cause for removal. President Obama asked for McChrystal's resignation. McChrystal gave it. No fight, no controversy. Why? Because the cause was clear. The offense was obvious. McChrystal knew he'd crossed a line. That's what justified removal looks like. Clear violation, undeniable evidence, resignation rather than firing. Compare that to trying to fire a general just because you disagree with their military advice, or because they're not politically loyal enough, or because they won't do something legally questionable. Those scenarios create congressional investigations, media firestorms, damage to civil-military relations. And here's the thing, generals have resources. They have congressional allies. They have public respect. They have decades of service and credibility. If a president fires a general without clear justification, that general can fight back, publicly, through congressional testimony, through media interviews, through their networks. And the president might lose that fight. This brings us to the core question. Why is the system designed this way? Why make it hard for the president to fire generals? Because the alternative is worse. Imagine if the president could fire any general anytime, for any reason. What happens? Generals become political. They stop giving honest military advice. They tell the president what he wants to hear, not what he needs to hear. They worry about political loyalty instead of military effectiveness. The military becomes an extension of the president's political operation, like a presidential campaign staff, changing every 4 to 8 years based on who's in office. That's not how professional militaries work. And it's not how American civil-military relations are supposed to function. The American system is built on civilian control of the military. That's non-negotiable. The president is commander-in-chief. Civilians make the decisions. But civilian control doesn't mean the president treats generals like political appointees. It means the president makes the decisions, but generals give their best professional military advice. Even when that advice is uncomfortable, even when it contradicts political goals, even when it's not what the president wants to hear. And the system protects generals who do that, not from accountability, not from removal for cause, but from arbitrary political firing. This is actually what separates democracies from authoritarian regimes. In authoritarian countries, generals serve at the whim of the leader. They're fired for political disloyalty. The military becomes a tool of personal power. In democracies, generals serve the nation and the Constitution, not the president personally, and they can't be easily fired for giving inconvenient advice. That's the system. Messy, complicated, sometimes frustrating for presidents who want quick changes. But it works. It's kept the American military professional, non-political, focused on defense rather than politics. Does this mean the president has no control over the military? Of course not. The president makes all the major decisions: war and peace, deployment of forces, rules of engagement, strategic direction. The president appoints generals to key positions. He chooses who becomes chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who commands geographic regions, who leads services, and the president can fire generals for cause, for insubordination, for misconduct, for failure. What he can't do is fire them arbitrarily, for political reasons, for disagreeing with policy, for not being personally loyal enough. That's the distinction, and it matters. Because the day a president can fire generals like political appointees is the day the American military starts becoming something different, something less professional, something more political. And that's why the system makes it hard. Not impossible, just hard. Hard enough that presidents have to think carefully, hard enough that there are checks and balances, hard enough that the military stays professional. So the next time you hear someone say the president should just fire all the generals and start over, remember this. The system that makes that hard is the same system that keeps the military professional, non-political, and loyal to the Constitution rather than to individual leaders. It's not a bug, it's a feature that protects American democracy. That's how military and political power actually work in America. Not how most people think, but how the system was designed to function. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more breakdowns of how military ranks and political power actually work. I'll see you next week.